Act Now, Save Later, another powerful video. I think what struck out here was the 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion numbers. All right, let's keep up our pace. The day's fourth panel now. It's going to come into session pretty soon. Governance, migration, and conflict risks. For that, to moderate that, we're going to call up Shelley Inglis. She's the UNDP's governance and peacebuilding team leader. Yeah, we can bring up the whole team. If we can get, we're 4 people, we can get Shelley over here. Here. And then you could maybe leave that one open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, yeah. We've made a slight technical adjustment here. We actually have microphones here that also do work. So if you want to speak into this, if you feel more comfortable. All right? Thank you, Shelley. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah? Is it working?
Arkadaşlar bir bakabilir miyiz? Bu mikrofon çalışıyor mu?
I'll use this one. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Inglis, and I'm the Governance and Peacebuilding Team Leader here at IRH. And welcome to our fourth panel, which is on risks related to crisis, conflict, migration, and social cohesion. So I'll start by just saying when I was, or a while ago, when resilience became a big topic, somebody described resilience to me as the bus or the car that has been designed so that no matter the bump on the road that the car faces, it will remain intact. It has the shock absorbers, it has the right velocity, it has the right structural foundations needed as a vehicle to manage any kind of disruption and absorb any kind of blockage in the road. And that the nature of the blockage in the road, the nature of the bump in the road, didn't matter. The bump could be a disaster, the bump could be related to economic crisis, could be related to social cohesion, wouldn't matter. The car would go over the bump and not crumble. The tires would not come off. It would not disintegrate. It would be able to keep going. That's the concept of resilience. But in some ways, I think that concept is too simplistic, because I think this panel is also about who's driving the car. And maybe if we have a drunk driver, no matter how good the car is, no matter how great the institutions are, human failure, that element in driving that vehicle has got to be an important part of the equation. So that's our panel today. We're talking about risks in which human decisions can be a big part of creating those risks and maintaining those risks. And I'm really pleased to have a very strong gender panel with me and a very knowledgeable panel. And I'll introduce them now. I have Dr. Parviz Mullojanov, who has a PhD in Islamic studies from Basel and comes to us from Tajikistan, to my left. I have with me Miss Irena Vojackova-Sollorano, who is the UNDP resident representative and United Nations resident coordinator in Turkey. And I have with me Miss Nataliya Gumenyuk, who is the head of an independent TV station in Ukraine called Hromadske, TV. And finally, Sonja Lokar, who is the chair of the Central and Eastern European Women's Network, who comes to us from Slovenia. So welcome to the panel. This panel sort of picks up on a lot of the things that we see on Twitter and social media today and every day. It talks about the risks related to radicalization, leading to violent extremism and terrorism, the overflow and the impact of the refugee crisis, and also the wave of migrants trying to find their way to the European Union, as well as the conflict over many years, a dormant level of conflict in our region has now, in the last couple of years, reignited in Ukraine. And what is the impact of these risks on communities and societies, and particularly on women? So that's where we start this conversation. And let me first go by asking Parviz maybe to speak a little bit about how radicalization, this new normal, how we see the drivers. What is driving forms of radicalization in societies? Parviz.
Thank you. Indeed, there is certain signs of radicalization across the region. And one of the signs, for instance, of religious radicalization is the increasing number of people joined ISIS in the last 2 or 3 years. Actually, it's, the number is increased almost in 3-4 times, according to different estimations. So the question is, which is actually the subject of debates between different entities and groups of civil society, expert society, and the government people, international organizations, is what are the factors that are driving the radicalization across the region. I'm talking not only religious radicalization, but there are certain factors that actually promoting both religious and non-religious, secular, and other kinds of radicalization, not only in Central Asia, but across former Soviet Union. I just want to mention 4 of them, which are supposed to be more relevant, in my opinion, and they are most cited by the expert society people. So the first and the main factor, in my opinion, is the increasing social injustice and inequality in the region and in every local state. The social inequality expressed actually in 2 main forms. So first is the social stratification of society, when there is an increasing gap between the poor and the rich, and when the majority of population, at least considerable part of population, actually locked within their social niche, unable to cross the boundaries and to improve their social status in the even in the far future. So when we have these social restrictions, of course, according to the studies, according to the interviews we had with different people joined radical groups, this is one of the factors that driving discontent and radicalization of different people, different representatives of different groups of society. The second factor is the lacks of social, economic, political model formed in the majority of the post-Soviet countries after the collapse of the Soviet Union and socialist system. There is a lot of such discussions about those features. I just mentioned a few of them. This is the so-called command administrative style of management, excessively centralized system, lack of transparency in decision-making level, lack of power division, Soviet remnants of management style, lack of economic freedom, inclination to macroeconomy versus microeconomy, plus there is commodity-dependent economies based on export of raw materials, oil, gas, or labor forces abroad. And this is a special type of formation of political elite, so-called clan of political faction type of formation, due to which the whole system is distinguished by the higher level of nepotism and corruption. And one of the features of this system, conflict-generating features, is that due to, in this system, there is considerable reduction of social lifts. And what is more important, not only for poor people or vulnerable strata of population, but also for representative of so-called relatively prosperous strata of population, representative of different business groups, middle and small-sized businesses. And according to the studies we had, a considerable number of people who joined ISIS, at least up to 20–30% of them, actually represent most educated groups of the society, some businessmen circles, business groups, so they are not really poor. So there is widely discussed relations or link between the poverty and radicalization is not proved in this case. So the third factor, this is the lack of government policies towards the opposition, towards the religion, towards the religious groups. And there is a lot of discussion with this regard of that, because in many discussions, so the government actually called as one of the main factors of that promoting radicalization, their policies. So in terms of the religious radicalization, for instance, in Central Asian countries, one of the lacks is that the law enforcement agencies, the correspondent government agencies, they are not able to see the difference between the religiosity and radicalism. So due to this kind of approach, they don't see difference between a devoted Muslim and a member of a radical organization. It gives a floor for a number of mistakes when innocent people are tackled and become discontent, and it's also promoting the social base for radicals. There is no clear criteria to distinguish between moderate and non-moderate oppositional political groups, Islamic groups, clergy, etc. Therefore, the excessive pressure exerted by the governments to moderate groups promotes their shift towards political alliance with radicals. And of course, it also considerably promotes the social base for radical organizations, creating them new opportunities. And the fourth factor has a more ideological character. There is, in Central Asia and Muslim populated regions of post-Soviet Union, we see there is a prevalence of radical groups' propaganda and ideology over the so-called software machine of government and other stakeholders. So what we see now that, of course, government was able to, the governments of Central Asia and other countries of post-Soviet Union, they managed to control the most radical and violent groups. They control their activities to bring them into the underground. They control their rise and increasing influence. But on the other hand, now, today, in the last 2 years, there is a shift to ideological sphere. So the radical groups managed to shift, to focus their activities in ideological sphere, in the sphere of propaganda. And it seems to be that the governments are not really prepared for such turn. And we see that now that actually they are losing the ground. And therefore, there is a certain sign of radicalization of different parts which are not considered radical. Like in Central Asia, we have clergy, important clergymen that officially they are called themselves moderate. They are moderate. They work for government, so-called different committees and religious committees. But at the same time, if you take their statements, if you take their preachers, what they say, what they think, how they express their views, this is actually not moderate Islam. And this, it means that the religious groups, the radical groups, the international network managed to change the strategy. And the strategy today to penetrate within the religious society is to change it from within, to create lobbies within the government, to promote the radical views through moderate clergy, promote so-called literal reading of Islam, of Quran and Sharia and Islamic law through religious stratum. And by that, actually, they're promoting the radical ideology. I mean, what is actually also promoting the split within the society and split between the different religious and secular groups. What to expect in the next several years? We can predict the intensification of activities of jihadist groups. The majority of them now, at least the active part of them now, based out of the region, in Syria and Afghanistan. But it's quite possible to predict their return from abroad. And the last statement of Baghdadi, who just recently stated and applied to his supporters in Iraq that to go to the mountains or to return to their countries and to continue the fight. So it's quite possible that in the several years they would be returned into the region back from Afghanistan and Syria. Of course, today it's only one-way direction, but it's quite possible that sooner or later, because ISIS sooner or later would be defeated. So it's quite possible that this group of people, and they are about 5,000 in Syria and Iraq, and about 3,000-4,000 in Afghanistan, they eventually go back to the post-Soviet countries. But the main threat of radicalization, of destabilization, not those radicals, because in any situation, they constitute the minority of population, the extreme minority. So they would, of course, they would be able to conduct some terrorist attacks. They would be able to use, to use in their favor of destabilization. But it's hardly to believe they would come to power by themselves. So the only opportunity for them, if there would be, first of all, a wider destabilization in the region, and there would be some groups in the society that would be able to go into alliance, political alliance with them. And therefore, the main threat is the radicalization of the wider groups of population, which would create a wider social base for the returning radicals. And in this case, we could envisage, for instance, the further involvement and alliance between radicals and so-called peaceful Salafi groups who recently reject any involvement into violence. There is also quite possible an alliance with the so-called moderate Islamist groups, moderate clergy, and even some secular opposition groups, what we see now in the case of Tajik opposition. So because the peculiarity of the region, and this is also one of the signs of concern, I'm finishing, this is that the secular, so-referred democratic opposition is in a deep decay, and both organizational and ideological decay, and the only alternative to the local regimes today, at least in Central Asia, is the radical Islamic opposition and some radical Islamic groups of nationalist character. So everything, in my opinion, now depends on the governments themselves, because they're actually the most and the only power decision-taking power. So depending on the government's policies, the returning and existing jihadist groups or radicals of all other kinds would remain exclusive and isolated, or would find allies and supporters across the society. Thanks.
Thanks. So, so the risks and the dynamics of radicalization in Central Asia, coming from a perception or the drive and the conflict in Syria and Iraq has been conflated in many parts of the media and much of the discourse, particularly in the West, with the current and recent past of large-scale refugee and migration movement towards Europe, which has been perceived by many as a further risk to the resilience of the European Union, to the resilience of societies taking in or interacting with refugees and migrants. Irena, can you say something about the experience and the conflation of these issues with respect to both Turkey, but as well Serbia and Macedonia along the Balkan route and from the perspective of Europe?
Thank you so much. If you allow me to take it a little bit broader, because if we just narrow it down to the recent movement of people, I think we might miss the point. We talked about the radicalization and that one of the main causes are inequalities. And I would like to pick up there because migration flows and definitely refugee flows are results of inequalities. That is as a blank statement. The other statement I would like to make is that people, when they leave their countries, they leave countries because there is danger or inequality. And that means that the countries where people were living were not able to manage one or the other. The reason why people leave is when their life is in danger, and this is what we call refugees. When people leave to decide to go somewhere else on their free will, these are migrants. And this is a distinction that unfortunately has been blurred in the last years and has been misused. Calling refugees migrants is not paying justice to their need to be protected. And calling migrants refugees is not paying justice to them leaving because of inequalities. So I think these are the two words that we need to understand what they mean legally and what they mean politically. I wanted to go back to the radicalization and often the connection to migrants or refugees. Radicalization has nothing to do with the migration or refugee flow. It has something to do with being radicalized and then going or staying and being a radical in their own country. So these are misperceptions that unfortunately are being perpetuated, and we hope that through discussions like here, through more people understanding the differences, that we will be able to educate people that one cannot declare refugees and migrants as being radicals. These are people who flee for their life, or these are people who look for opportunities. We have internationally, when international law was created after the Second World War, let's say in the 50s, we have defined the Refugee Convention, which clearly says who is a person that needs protection. And this is a convention that still holds today, and most countries have signed and ratified this convention, and we hope that they will also apply it and not forget about their international obligations. So while we have taken care of refugees, migration has been a little bit a stepchild in the international legal sphere. And most governments were proud to say our nationals, they are free to leave the country. But no country has said everybody is free to come. And when you leave a country, you have to enter another. So this is a flaw in the international legal sphere that is now being addressed. We had last year in September, the New York Declaration was signed at the wake of the General Assembly, and a debate has started on the Global Compact on Refugees and Migration. While the Global Compact on Refugees is dealing with the Refugee Convention, which holds, but the Global Compact on Migration will tackle these issues. When people leave, they are entering another country, and governments have to create legal systems that are understandable to everybody and that are realistic and addressing the flows that are coming. The migration flows, the irregular migration flows, that means people when they go without actually having the permission to enter a country, but still these are migrants because they are just looking for better opportunities and are not fleeing life-threatening situations. There are more and more of these people. That means that we have more and more societies that have inequalities. So it is not the issue of migration, it is the issue of inequalities that we have to address and understand what measures we have to put in place to address the countries where people are leaving and measures in countries where people are arriving. I will then speak later about what it means to the countries and how they can prepare. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So at the same time that we've had this wave of refugee crisis, as well as a real attention to the issues of radicalization, also in our region we've had this sort of reignition of conflict, active conflict in our region, and geopolitics, which I think someone said people thought had gone away, really had not gone away, and quite a lot is playing out in front of us, particularly in Ukraine. So Natalia, maybe you can speak a little bit about conflict risks and how they are perceived from the perspective of communities and civil society.
Of course, thanks a lot for your attention. I think these are the days where it's exactly very interesting to analyze, because it's exactly 3 years since the conflict in Ukraine had started. And I have my humble journalistic experience. I remember how the annexation of Crimea had taken place. I mean, I've been working in the field in the very first days, and still, I mean, for these last 3 years, I'm keep going to the place and remembering that things which were unthinkable and very futuristic, you know, like remembering the day of the annexation, that it mightn't happen, nobody would believe tomorrow you would wake up in a totally different world. But you know, now this is a time of inclusion. But I think why Ukrainian case is extremely interested, because Ukraine had no history of the conflict in the modern age. I'm speaking about the last decades. So all the terms like refugees, landmines, you know, all the things connected to the direct fight are were totally exotic for the society, which of course made the society extremely traumatic after the first casualties. I would go, of course, to the what we lived through the last 3 years and our numerous talks to a numerous amount of people. Of course, speaks that of course social inequality and of course the economy would be somewhere in the core of a lot of conflicts. But it's for us very important to understand how all these grief and unfairness could be misused. These days we also not celebrating, but marking the 3 years of the organization, it's a media organization down by alumnus of our best journalistic school, which is called Stop Fake. So what it's basically doing, it's already for 1,100 days, 3 years in a row on a daily basis, monitoring different kind of propaganda and fake messages for 3 years. So for 3 years, they have something to publish. There would be 5 or 6 messages, and they were always changing. At first, you can start with the language, then later you can start with, I don't know, frightening the society with the army or any kind of other threats. But later it goes to economic disaster or, you know, anything else, which also a factor. But of course, I should explain that in every this case, the vulnerability of the government or the vulnerability or some, you know, really critical situation would be misused. But sometimes what is also mentioned, I can speak about Crimea and Donbass, 2 particular cases, that in that case there would be always this message that the population of the region was some kind of undermined. And the point is that it's true that they had the economic troubles, if you count, but then you have to say that there is no big difference between the trouble they had and their other regions as well, which put the governments in a difficult position. They can't deny there were the troubles, but sometimes they have the reason to deny that there is something unusual about this particular region. I'd like to point out some of the things with the civil society and how I believe, though we speak a lot about the conflict in Ukraine, it had saved it, because we have 1.5 million internally displaced from the eastern Ukraine. And most of them, they didn't leave to Europe. They are living on the areas close to the conflict, to the capital of the country. And what is often isn't mentioned, that most of the volunteer groups which had come up from and are supporting the society are done from the internally displaced themselves. The biggest human rights activists, the most loud voices, those who are becoming the advisors to the ministers, those who are setting the policy after 3 years, they are the people who left from the conflict, which helps a bit not to have this us and them discourse. I would give like just a few short examples that even at the first stage of the conflict, the state emergency service and even the big funds for the Ukrainian billionaires would put the numbers of this tiny organization with 10 people to say that they're where you should call in case, you know, you need to get some help. And they kind of managed to develop and, saved it from this tension which could have there. There is a bit and the second example would be the that we are speaking about the organization and the people, civil society groups which are working in the territory controlled by the Ukrainian state. Shortly moving, there was a very, very strong group of the volunteers working for 2.5 years in Donetsk, in the occupied territory. So unfortunately, they were kicked out a year ago, and they were, you know, the ones who were going somewhere, of course, working a lot with international community, but without, as you know, without the local guides, you can do way less. What is important with that, they were kicked out because they kind of got a lot of trust from the local population and probably could be considered as some kind of somebody who could challenge the separatists there, though they didn't have a will. But the point to think about now that for a group which used to work on the occupied territories, it's extremely difficult to work later outside because for everybody you would be considered as a kind of a traitor or something. So the trust is very important. And the last example, because after I pass the world, I think the very interesting case is the case of Crimea, in particular, because we're speaking about radicalization. In Crimea, which is 1.5 million people annexed 3 years ago. In the very beginning, it's a very different dynamic because it's an official Russian territory so they have the Russian security service there. So at first there were some people who were kidnapped, and there was the civil society was extremely weak because it's a threat. You could be, moved to Moscow. We have people arrested on the Russian territory. And we have 300,000 Crimean Tatars. It's a minority Muslim community. Their political organization, if you are connected to them, you could be charged with extremist, and if you are practicing Muslim, you could be charged with a terrorist. So there are like a few dozen of cases, people arrested for that. But what is interesting with my traveling through these 3 years, the people who had come to govern about security service, they have come from the regions of Russia like Caucasus or Bashkortostan, where they have the practice of dealing with the radical groups. And more or less, these security service people coming to the territory where there was never this kind of experience, where there's a very secular population, and kind of creating the same cycle where you arrest the people, it creates the resistance, you arrest the practicing Muslim, and which can create some kind of a tension. So I was very concerned about that half a year ago when I was in Crimea, but just coming back like a couple of weeks ago was very curious how exactly the civil society can challenge that, because in that particular case, what happened, not just radicalization, but since there are more and more people arrested, the families, the kids, the wives of those arrested people gathered together and started to provide the support for the families, for the kids, and kind of moving this, this resistance or something, not to this radicalization, but something totally different as like self-support, which I think also is a huge factor, so helps me to be a bit more optimistic. But really thinking how you really can create artificially radicalization where it was never before. So the issue is that the two issues to be very clear is that definitely the civil society could play a major role, and it had played in Ukraine. But after 3 years, the volunteers, the people could be really exhausted. And it's very important today to understand that they can't substitute the government. There should be some different form, because where they substitute, the government fails. So there should be some different form of communication. And that's something really we have to think about.
Thanks so much. Natalia, you touched on it, but maybe we could look a little bit more at the impact of these trends. So rising levels of either outward conflict or social cohesion, or provoking social issues with social cohesion, radicalization, the movement of people, and a perception of the threats that movement of people may pose on women in our region in particular, and on the gender dynamics in our region. Can you tell us how these risks are affecting over 50% of the population?
Thank you for the floor. First of all, I think that the effects of armed conflict on women are well explored, and we know them also. I will not repeat that. The only thing I would like to say here is that women do present the only group when all the society becomes berserk before the conflict erupts, that a very small number of women are always there to say no to the war at any conditions. No to the war. And these groups are very small normally. This is my experience from the Balkan conflict. When the mainstream politics everywhere became ultra-nationalistic and ready to start an armed conflict, in all the countries of the republics of the former Yugoslavia, there were small groups of women who said, no way. We will not fight. We want this conflict to be solved in a peaceful manner, with talks, with dialogue. Nobody listened to them. And I think that this is one of the characteristics how the conflict impacts on women. In the moment before it erupts, there is a group of women which will be very, very important when the conflict is over. Because these are the only women who can then help that the society starts to heal after the conflict. And this is exactly the experience in former Yugoslavia. What we learned from that first shock of women in conflict is that women cannot prevent the war in the streets. Even if there are many, even if they bring people in the streets to present their rejection of the war. What we have seen in Sarajevo a few days before the war erupted, there were massive demonstrations of the people against the wars. And then these demonstrations were dispersed practically by those who started to fire, to bomb and to fire. But what we learned from this was that we need to bring women in the places where the decisions are taken. The war can be prevented in the prime minister's seat, not in the street. So what we learned from that was that after, when the wars were over and we got the possibility to come together, when the Stability Pact for Southern Eastern Europe was formed, we started a huge movement for political empowerment of women, to get women into politics in order to be able to prevent next conflict. Because in the Balkans, the situation, as you have seen, is always very vulnerable, I would say fragile. The question is now, have we succeeded? And yes, we have succeeded in many things. When the war ended, the average in our parliaments was 7%. Today, it's more than 25%. In Kosovo, in Serbia, in Macedonia, in Slovenia, it's over 30%. So we have, in some parliaments, we have, in some governments, we have now numerous women. We had all of a sudden women who became ministers of defense, ministers of internal affairs, ministers for European integration. So these were not only the portfolios typical for women agency. It was much more than that. But what showed through these post-war times was that we could not, with all these women in these positions, reverse the economic development approach. We could not really prevent, these women could not prevent social inequalities to grow. They could not prevent that the institutions became more working by the rule of law. And this is why I think we have everywhere, also in our countries, very similar situation as was described. We have the radicalization, we have the people who are really trying to push our societies really far, far back in the past. And what is interesting, political leaders who are not radicalized themselves have the tactics everywhere to give in, to make a compromise, which in fact is opening the floor for all these extreme ideas to become mainstream political ideas. And this, I think, is the main danger. And women being there in the governments, being there in the parliaments, they did their very best to mitigate this danger, but they didn't really succeed to push it away. There were a lot of attempts of women in political positions, especially parliamentarians, to come together in the region to discuss the issues which are close to the needs of women, even to start a dialogue. For example, Kosovo and Serbian women parliamentarians made an effort under the auspices of the OSCE and Sonja's, it was Sonja's idea, in fact. And it started and it gave some results. It was really interesting. For example, we had last year this big Security Council in Belgrade, and in the moment of this Security Council, there was a conflict between Kosovo and Serbian leadership upon the ownership of Trepča. So it was so tense that the politicians from Kosovo didn't want to come to the Security Council, but women came, and they were there, and they discussed with the counterparts from Serbia the issues and said, we have to have a dialogue, it's no other way. But these are things which are somehow a buffer that the things are not much worse than they should be, but they are not solved yet, I'm afraid.
Thanks. So what I'd like to do is turn to back to the car and the drunk driver and ask the panel a little bit to talk about knowing these risks. What is it that actually can be done to build the car better? What is it that it takes to build a car that can go over a bump in the road and remain driving and strong? What is it to build resilience? And how do we manage, or how do we better address the driver behind the wheel? In addition to the perfect car, how do we get at this issue of who is driving the car? And maybe I'll start with Parviz. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I know these panelists are really experts and have a lot of really solid advice, but please do keep it as short and succinct as you can. Parviz, over to you.
So now this is the most difficult task, because everywhere and every time when you have memos, analytical memos, studies, there is a big portion devoted to criticism and situation description, but when it comes to recommendation, just 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very general. So it's usually is the most difficult task, especially when we talk about the radicalization, because also, I mean, we know, the causes, we know now approximately the situation. We don't know actually what to do in general. And this is actually the source of debates between experts, civil society groups, international organizations, etc. So what I heard, and actually what I can propose myself is, first of all, for the governments, this is as one of the main reasons of this radicalization is the social inequality, social injustice, is to tackle this particular issue. It means that the government should proceed with the creation of social lists for various groups of population, especially the ones which actually plays an important role in the society. And here I mean the business groups, small business groups, not only the poor strata of population as traditionally considered, but also, there is a suffering stratum all across the region, all across post-Soviet Union. This is the small business, medium-sized business society, which actually the base for formation of the middle class. And middle class is actually the most. This is the stratum which actually is interested in democratization, changes, and creation of just society. And what we see now in the region, that actually this is the most vulnerable strata becoming now, and this strata actually is becoming interested in destabilization, because for many representatives of small business sector, this system is not acceptable, and they see that the only way to change the system, to increase their social needs, to improve their social status, economic status, is to destroy the system. Therefore, we see now that actually many radical organizations, not only religious ones, they successfully try to involve and to play with this business stratum representatives, which is very dangerous phenomenon for the society. So, and this is actually one of the legs of the government policies across the region. And of course, this means also the decreasing corruption and nepotism, tackling the corruption and nepotism issue, which is, according to the studies, this is the problem which actually irritates more the people, especially the young generation, and promoting economic opportunities for people as well. And of course, what it means that the government need to design and implement a comprehensive set of reforms to change the current socio-economic system, which is not sustainable in the longer term, because how the system could be sustainable as it is based on export of raw materials. So when the budget, 30%, 50% of budget based by the export of raw materials, of labor force, of course such system is not sustainable in general. As to, of course, it would be very difficult to achieve because the governments across the region demonstrate their inability and preparedness for such bigger changes, and willingness actually to do such changes. And actually this is the task for, and the challenge for other stakeholders, also international society and agencies. And their task actually to promote the evolutionary development, to convince the government to conduct thorough reforms, because anyway, there is no other way, because the system would not be sustainable in the longer term. And the evolutionary development could be ensured only by the implementation of wider reforms, radical reforms, I would say. And just the last point is that, and the major approach should be also, of course, I mean, the tradition now, at least for the last 15 years, is to work with the government, first of all, to increase the capacity of the government. But actually, it proved to be a wrong strategy, because the governments, we invest money in the governments, we invest money, considerable amount of money in the rising their capacity, building their capacity, and we see actually no positive outcome. And what we see now is actually, except of democratization, we see re-democratization. Even what we achieved have achieved 10 years ago now is decreasing. So it means that actually the stake to support the government actually it should be balanced. And we shall, what we have to do now is to promote the civil society groups as the main driving forces for changes. And this is the problem, for instance, for Central Asia, because since 2005, we dropped a number of programs and projects implemented and designed in order to support this exclusively, especially the civil society groups. And therefore, this is one of the major reasons of the current crisis. And also, and the last point, this is also related to that. This is the promotion of economic groups, as I mentioned, which actually are interested in changes. The formation of the middle class stratum in the region, which is also the major problems now. And we have actually the opposite tendencies and trends now across the post-Soviet Union territories. Thanks.
Thanks. Irena, maybe I can move to you around building resilience related to migratory flows or refugees.
I would like to go back to your example of the driver. And if we talk about resilience, we talk about situations that surprise us, that we are not ready for, and that happens in refugee situations. So after I explained the difference between migrants and refugees, let's now focus on real emergencies, which are refugees and not migrants. When a driver is driving down the road and sees a bump, so the driver has a driver's license, and during the driving exam, one has prepared the driver for the bump and how to react. In terms of governments, it means that governments have legislation, and we assume that governments know their legislation. As I was saying, most governments that are, especially during this refugee crisis, they have signed the Refugee Convention, and they have systems on how to deal with refugees, how to do the refugee determination, and all rules are in place. So we would wish that governments know their legislation and apply their legislation. You have referred to the two countries where, by coincidence, I have served, which is Serbia and Turkey, and I must say these are one of the few countries that knew their rules, and they have applied them. Therefore, these were countries where there was no panic. Turkey is housing 3 million refugees. There was never panic in Turkey about 3 million refugees coming, because one had a legislation, one put it in place, one has built refugee camps, one has housed people, one has given them access to education, to housing, to health care. And nothing is ideal, but one has done the right thing. In Serbia, where 1 million people have walked through Serbia, there was no panic. The local population has helped, and the government has applied the rules that they had. And somehow all other countries in between, they forgot their legislation. And therefore, we had very sad and very tragic incidences on the route. And there comes the resilience into the game. That means to have resilience, first of all, one has to know one's own rules, and then one has to have the ability to be flexible to apply. And especially coming down to something that I have experienced with my colleagues in Serbia and in Turkey, is the national legislation, but what it boils down to is what is being done in the municipalities where really people are affected by this sudden inflow of refugees. Even they transit, they arrive today and they leave tomorrow. So they need water, they need food, they need temporary shelter, but tomorrow they are gone. Or they arrive by the millions and they, after 6 years, are still there. That means one applies the law and gives them access to health care, access to education, and access to the work market. So these are two examples of resilience that is possible, and that we have definitely from UNDP and as the UN system, both countries, we have supported them in this. And these are also the few countries that have actually cooperated with the United Nations from the beginning. And there I would say that resilience is possible. And that would be my main message. Thank you.
Thanks, Irena. So Natalia, you were talking about civil society, and do you want to comment?
I would like to follow up exactly on that, because you mentioned there was no panic, and there was panic in a lot of Western countries, and as well in Ukraine, where we didn't have, for instance, at that time, refugees from the Middle East. But that was very especially interesting because the Ukrainians, pick up this Western, more or less, idea about, what's happening. We recently done the story, for Ukrainian and Russian-speaking world on the Syrians in Turkey. And what was our focus, which is considered to be a very distant conflict if you have the own one, that showing in particular the Syrian civil society and Syrian groups which were helping themselves, showing that, being honest, the people who are helping their societies most, they are the locals. And this phenomenon is heavily underreported, heavily underrepresented all over, international media, local media, everywhere, which more or less denies these societies, the hope to rebuild. Because unless you just really put those labels of the horrors of the, the world of refugees, which had become, really misused in a lot of times, you really deny. And of course, it's not very popular message. The message about the radicals, it's definitely sexier, being honest. But I think it was very interesting that for our people then, it was very easy to explain and relate why a teacher would be ready to risk their life and go, to help the people under the ruins. Why the person who worked in the drugstore would organize the surgeons in the city under the siege. And then you really treat this place differently, which really build the, I think we can't underestimate this factor of the images and the media. But shortly going on how it's well connected. We are an independent organization which is funded by the international donors. And what is interesting, we're very grateful for the support, but a lot of them really, since we are funded, really expect to have the ratings as the big TV channels, with all these tabloid-style agenda, and of course, surprise, why you are not, the better, which should be also understood that, you can't play that way. There are the limit. The story could be done, but there is an absolute support for this kind of change of the coverage by the journalists and the more responsibility and more this connection. But the final, which I think very important example from the Ukraine, I'm for 2 years speaking about building resilience because what we also should understand that civil society still should be as accountable as the government. There is always the risk that civil society groups or some volunteer communities would kind of be considered themselves that they, that they do not follow the rules or something in the long run. And also, they can't substitute the state. I said it, but it's crucial, because if the volunteer groups would, for a long time, take care of the internally displaced, it makes the state lazy, and then you just don't build a system. It's the mistakes you can always do, but so we still are finding our way how to cooperate, where you can advise. So accountability of this society, and as well that not substituting the state as well in the long run, and having it as a very important actor, it's also very crucial.
Thanks. Sonja, over to you. Other ways to build resilience, building on.
I didn't say anything about the refugee crisis and how women reacted in the region. I think that it was typical that in all these women who were fighters for women human rights, when the crisis erupted, immediately came into support of the refugees. And they were very, very important, especially in my country, Slovenia, for example. This 500,000 of people went through Slovenia in 3 months. The government was not really ready for that. The police was not ready. The army was not prepared. They didn't know what to do with this. So when they started to organize this transfer from one border to another in 3 hours, it was crucial to have a lot of volunteers who were helping to the refugees at the border. And these were mostly women who came and helped. So this is one story. Another story is how when all these things were already over, and then some very few asylum seekers started to be a huge problem in Slovenia. How we will feed them, how we will give them the place to stay, how their children will go in the school with us. Maybe they are dangerous, they can do whatever, they have different sexual culture, and da-da-da-da. And here we made a big mistake. The government made the mistake, because in the moment when they should have really keep the front in the media discussion about this, they started to withdraw under the pressures. For example, if a group of, you are very right about that civil society should be also made accountable, not only the government. We didn't have only the women who helped and other good people, to say so, who helped. We also have the groups who said, one refugee here is too much. We don't want them in our school. We don't want them in our home for students, because they are dangerous. And in these situations, the government really didn't show the resilience to keep on the international obligations which are in the Convention on Refugees. So here this was a big, and then all of a sudden, under the pressure of these very conservative right-wing forces within the civil society, within the political parties, the emotional mood in the society changed. So the refugees all of a sudden were not people in need, but we're the danger for the population. And they will take our places, they will get our security support, social security transfers, and we will be the ones to lose. And when you come to this stage, then you are really, your government and progressive people are in really very weak situation. This is one point. And the other one, regarding the question how to solve the problems. It's rather easy to analyze, to see what is going on. I think that the most important thing we have to do is to have all the time in our minds that defending gender equality approach is the best strategy for development. So if we let what was already achieved to go under the pretext that we need the money for something much more important, we are in fact endangering everything, because the inequalities will grow very fast. People who will have no hope for the future will be too numerous. And then the radicalization will not be only in the small groups, but will become the mood of the society, and then God help us. So we have to be really strong to defend our already achieved rights. How we can do that? I can give you an example from Slovenia, which is very interesting. A few months ago, under the pretext that we need money also for the army, because we don't have enough investments in the army, we should reduce our costs of the health care. And where they found the point to save, we have in our constitution a special rights of free choice and the obligation of the state to make it happen. So it means that contraceptives, abortion, counseling, all is for free in Slovenia for those who are insured and health insured. And these are all the people practically. So the insurance wanted to make us pay for the contraceptives in order to save the money for other more important things. What we did, when I say what we did, women who are fighting for women human rights, and we have a special coordination in Slovenia, which is called Women's Lobby of Slovenia. We made a petition, and in 3-4 days, we got 7,000 signatures that we don't accept this. And then we made a protest. There is, you can maybe see it. We made a protest in front of this public insurance for health. And the government in this moment had to go towards us. If we didn't open the mouth, it would have changed. It would be done, and we would never, ever again have free of charge hormonal contraception. So how it was done? First it was civil society, then it was a pressure on MPs in the parliament, on the government and the women who are working in the government, and at the end they couldn't maneuver us out. And very similarly, a totally different example is a Polish Women Black March. If there was this huge 7 million women came to the streets to say, no, our abortion rights are already so minimal that this is a disaster. We don't give it at any price. Even the conservative, very conservative government had to give in. So what is the answer? Organize, fight. There is no other way. But don't do it only in civil society. Don't do it only in the street. Do it with those who are within the system and can be approached and can make a good decision.
Great, so there we have it. Just a second, I'm going to give an opportunity just if there are any burning questions. So you actually heard quite an extraordinary walk through conflict, social cohesion, radicalization risks, how they're impacting the region from various perspectives, and a wealth of information about really what it takes to respond to that at the sort of social community, individual citizens, civil society, local government, and then finally national government, and a real need and drive, I think, to maintain and to push forward on change while also preserving and respecting the progress that has been made and not giving up on a lot of the fundamental sort of values and frameworks that have been worked on for so long. So this is in the face of a very changing world. I wonder if anyone out there has a question for our panel. Any questions? No. Okay, so we will...
I'm sure they have questions. We're going to have
yeah.
You can actually approach Shelley, Irena, Natalia, Sonja, and Parviz. So thank you, appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody.